about the Vietnam and how people felt about it here in the United States. Okay, so there was quite a bit of the opposition to the war, especially as it dragged on. What we saw was that the younger people had a bigger problem with it than the older people. And so we call that a generation gap when the views of the different generations are really very obvious. So, why are some people opposed? Well, there's different reasons. First of all, some people don't like that we're over there at all, right? It appears it's a civil war between the two parts of Vietnam. So, why are we over there? We've talked about that last time, right? That we saw it as a threat of communism, and that's why. But again, many people feel like maybe we shouldn't have been, interfering in other countries' internal struggles. Another one is that we're spending a lot of money on the war, and there's people who need help in the United States. So programs that we could be, using to make our own people, happier and do better. The money's going towards the war effort. Also, some people had a problem with helping the southern part of Vietnam because remember, the leader was a dictator and corrupt, right? And so many people are like, why are we helping him, right? It doesn't seem like he's a good guy. Why are we helping that side? So for whatever reason, there was a very strong movement against the war, and there was it's coincided with the same timing of what they call the counterculture. Remember, we talked about this a little briefly about how, this new civil rights era and people are all about, speaking up and fighting for rights and, kind of thinking for yourself. And there's like this hippie culture, right? And it's going against, again, it's kind of generational. The new generation is not worried about, the traditional way things have been. Men, you can have long hair. You don't have to be clean cut, and you can wear ripped jeans and not be as formal. And so there was this, like what you kind of think of as hippies, right? The time of the 60s. And that went along with also, kind of, doing drugs and wanting like freedom and not like just, nose to the grindstone, trying to make a lot of money and be successful. Kind of, definitely different cultural idea. Okay, so all this is going on. So you do see a lot of young people protesting. Also, they're very against the draft. The draft, remember, has been used before in other wars that all men 18 and older are required to sign up, and then they will draft some, and you'll have to be a soldier. And they did make something called deferment, which to defer means to postpone, right, or put off, or you could get excused from military service. And one of the things that you could get excused for was if you were a full-time college student. And that's all well and good if you're in college, but remember, a lot of people, couldn't afford college. So it did seem unfair that, the more wealthy part of society was getting out of it and the other poorer side is not. So a lot of people had a problem with the draft from that side. Also, there's just people against war in general. They call you a conscientious objector, someone who refuses to go because you are morally opposed to fighting, violence, or religious. There are some religions that it's not okay to use violence. So if you have moral or religious grounds, they would call you a conscientious objector. And so there's a lot of protests, and, this picture on the right is someone burning their draft card in protest. And so again, lots of young people doing these things. Okay, so basically there's kind of two sides going on, and it's very controversial and very very stressful here in the United States, right? And people who think, you support your country and you support the military no matter what, They were known as the Hawks because it's a bird of prey. It's a apt name. And then opponents were called doves, and dove is a good bird because of the symbol of peace, right? So President Johnson's approval rating started really dropping. People are getting more and more unhappy with the war going on. And we start to see a lot of big protests. There was one in D.C. in front of the Pentagon. And if you don't know, the Pentagon is literally shaped like a pentagon. And it's the headquarters for the Defense Department in Washington, D.C. And so there was a big protest there. And several others, and unfortunately, things are not getting better for the war. In 1968, this was a really bad year. The Vietnamese in the north and the, communists in the south, Viet Cong, they launched a series of attacks called the Tet Offensive. And it started on January 31st of 1967. So, this is the beginning of the Vietnamese New Year. Tet is the name for the Vietnamese New Year. So they started these series of attacks. They attacked U.S. military bases. They actually raided the embassy and went in, and that's in Saigon, the capital. They went and destroyed and attacked parts of some other major cities like the ancient capital of Vietnam, Hue, I believe you say it. Anyway, so the communists actually didn't do that well. Of course, the U.S. military has a much stronger, and so they ended up having a lot of losses. However, it still looked really bad for America at home. Part of the problem was we were shocked to see, we've been told that the war is almost over, we're the stronger ones, we're almost beating them, it's going to be over soon. And then all of a sudden they can do this, major attack. And so people started losing, they didn't trust the government that what they were saying was really true. Because how could it be true that, we're almost done when they can do this? So they're not as weak as they had been telling us. So that's called a credibility gap, right? They lost their credibility. So Johnson's getting more and more, people unhappy with him and his administration. So it's time for re-election. And some people in his own party, this is normal, right, say they're going to run against Johnson for the Democratic nomination. Like, think of our last election. There was a lot of people out there for the Democrats, not as many for Republicans, though, right? Because usually a second-term president is kind of a shoo-in for president, usually. Or very least a much better chance. So there's usually not as much resistance, right, for that. So Senator Eugene McCarthy, that's the picture at the top. He is a senator from Minnesota. He says he's going to run, and no one's too worried about that, right? He's not very well known. It's more of a, I'm against the war, and I'm going to use this as my platform to, make that a topic. Surprisingly, he still didn't win in New Hampshire, but that's an early primary, and he didn't win, but he got 42%. So that's pretty decent showing, and so that was surprising, and that again shows how widespread the opposition to the war really is. Robert Kennedy was also an anti-war candidate. He, was the attorney general during his brother's presidency, right, JFK, and he was now currently at that time a senator from New York, and so he's running, and a lot of people think that he had a pretty good chance. Again, very charismatic, very popular family, just like his brother, so surprisingly, in March, President Johnson did two things. He went on television and he, first of all, surprisingly said he's trying to work out peace. He's called it a new step towards peace. He's going to stop the bombing that they've been doing, and try to get the North into peace talks, which is the opposite actually of what his generals wanted. His generals wanted actually to get more troops there. But he, felt the message from the people that they were against it. And so he was going to do that. But then also, it's very surprising, he says he's not going to run for president, which was shocking. Everyone was assuming he was running. And, like I said, you usually would win. So we don't know, was he worried he might lose, or was he just so, discouraged by how the war is going or what? I'm not sure. But he decides not to run. And it's only a few days after that Dr. Martin Luther King is killed. So you can keep things, I know we've told you that before, but, this is where it fits into the timeline. And so, so imagine the feeling, in the country where everyone's been so stressed out about the war and civil rights and all these things, a lot of protests. And then, of course, Martin Luther King is killed. So it's after that once Johnson says he's not going to run, his vice president, Hubert Humphrey, says, okay, I'll run. Okay. And usually, again, vice president, you have a pretty good, you have the backing usually of the party and, clout. You've kind of been in trial or, close to it so he had a good chance. Now Kennedy, Humphrey decides not to enter into the primaries. And so really it's just Kennedy against McCarthy in the beginning. So Kennedy's doing well. He wins a primary in California. And then right after he gives his, speech for winning that, he is assassinated. So the poor Kennedys were really, had bad luck with people out to get them. So when the Democratic Convention is held, it's pretty clear that it's going to be Humphrey, right? Because remember, we said all along that he was going to have the backing of the party. He's pretty popular with Democrats in general because he's supportive of civil rights and labor causes. But he was part of the Vietnam policy with Johnson. So there are some definite, some people unhappy, and especially the people who are against the war. So what happens is the Democratic Convention is held in Chicago. And so a bunch of protesters show up in Chicago to make a big deal of it in front of the convention. They're upset that someone who was kind of, part of the problem in Vietnam and, they're not getting enough attention for their cause, right? So they have a big protest, and the Chicago mayor, Richard Daley, he sends out the police, and basically, long story short, the protesters start marching closer to where the Democratic Convention is. The police try to block them from doing that, and there was some bottles thrown and things. But the police also apparently used a lot violent tactics against the people, and clubbing them with nightsticks and gassing them, right? And so tear gas. And so they arrest a lot of people, and it's quite, again, all caught on television, and people are appalled, and it looks really bad that it happened right outside the Democratic Convention. So that really hurt the Democrats. Okay, Humphrey. All right, so there is, so that's the Democratic side. On the other side, a third-party person actually runs, Governor George Wallace. He is part of the American Independent Party, and he runs basically, criticizing those protesters that they're going against law and order, and he's going to get, control back and, support the police and making the protesters look like, thugs and against the war effort, right? And then also he does a lot talking about busing. He is against busing for integration. Remember, there's been civil wars things going on, and racial people don't, white people don't want, African Americans being, going to their schools and things like that. And so, he's playing the race card, right, and trying to support like the white people against their fears, racial fears. So he is, getting some votes. And then the Republican nominee is the former Vice President Richard Nixon. He claims he has the conservative silent majority who want law and order, who are not going out there and, protesting and things. And he says his plan is to have peace with honor in Vietnam, which no one really knows what he means. He had no specifics about how he was going to, get that peace and what does that mean with honor, right? Because it's hard to leave the war now because nothing's changed and it looks like we did it all for nothing, right? Well, he is able to convince people, right? It sounds good. And so Nixon ends up winning. He beats Humphrey pretty handily in the Electoral College, although if you look at the popular vote, it was actually pretty close. And he only wins with about 43% of the people wanting him. So already you can tell things are going to continue being tense, and there's no, easy solution coming in the near future.